Many early leaders, including Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, occasionally drank alcohol.
Words of wisdom.
Coffee and tea were on the pioneers' packing list before.
Mark 7:15. Nothing from without a man entering into man can defile.
Coffee and tea were on the pioneers' packing list before heading out to Utah. Back then, the emphasis was more so on moderation rather than total abstinence. But over time, tobacco, alcohol, tea, and coffee became prohibited completely. Sometimes we get so caught up in that specific list of substances that we lose sight of other ways we should be taking care of our bodies.
That's good. That's good.
In the future, I wouldn't at all be surprised to see a shorter list of absolutely prohibited substances and a greater emphasis on teaching correct principles and letting members decide how best to apply them.
Wow.
Sort of how we saw with the updated For the Strength of Youth booklet. For better or worse,
I'd be down to get rid of it completely.
it could happen. Number 9, something a little lighter, facial hair for church leaders. The clean-shaven look has obviously not always been the standard. For about 100 years, it was common for the president of the church to have facial hair. That seems to have changed with President David O. McKay in the 1950s as the clean-shaven look became the cultural standard. It may or may not remain the standard for leaders in the future. As long as nobody goes Orson Pratt on us, I have no problem with this changing. Number 8, changes to temple ordinances. They've gone through many changes in the past. Even over the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen a lot of changes, especially when COVID hit. In the early years, the endowment lasted for several hours. Before Joseph Smith died, he told Brigham Young,
"This is not arranged right, but we have done the best we could under the circumstances in which we are placed. And I wish you to take this matter in hand and organize and systematize all these ceremonies."
That process continues today, though the central purpose remains the same. Maybe there will be a 30-minute ceremony in the future. Maybe we'll be able to do 10 names instead of 1, or maybe spouses will be able to sit together instead of having men on one side of the room and women on the other. Who knows? Number 7, women giving blessings of healing. Interestingly, just as I was writing this episode, the church published an article confirming that in the past, women sometimes gave blessings to heal the sick in the name of Jesus Christ, but without invoking priesthood authority. As researcher Jonathan Stapley wrote, these early healings were not viewed so much as the exclusive exercise of priesthood authority as they were general spiritual gifts available to all saints. The gift was shared by all members, both male and female. Both Joseph Smith and Brigham Young are on record defending this practice, though things have obviously changed over time. There certainly could be a return to something like this in the future. Number 6, Sunday school presidencies. The church's handbook indicates that the bishop calls a Melchizedek priesthood holder to be the Sunday school president. That is the current policy of the church, and that's totally fine. That said, I don't see any doctrinal reasons for why this policy could never change. Sunday school presidents don't hold any priesthood keys. I wouldn't at all be surprised if the church allowed for all male or all female Sunday school presidencies in the future. Number 5, the flip side of that same coin, primary presidencies. Fun fact, primary didn't even exist church-wide until 1880. The church's handbook indicates that the bishop calls an adult woman to be the primary president. But again, I don't see any doctrinal reasons for why this policy could never change. I wouldn't at all be surprised if the church allowed for all female or all male primary presidencies in the future. Number 4, changes to temple clothes. I think at this point we're all keenly aware of how the temple garment has changed in the past, but that's not what I want to focus on here. When we go to the temple to participate in certain ordinances, we change into simple white clothes like these. Another fun fact, wearing white clothes in the temple was a practice that only caught on after Wilford Woodruff and Lucy Young began wearing white as officiators in the St. George Temple in 1877. I love the symbolism associated with wearing white in the temple, but it's a practice that is not necessarily set in stone. Number 3, changes to our emphasis on tithing. Paying tithing has been encouraged since the early years of the Restoration, but, for example, there was a time when you didn't necessarily have to be a full tithe payer to participate in temple ordinances. I would be surprised if that changed, but perhaps our emphasis on tithing is something that could change in the future. That said, the law of 10% tithing only came after the saints tried and failed to live the higher law of 100% consecration, having all things in common, like the New Testament disciples. So maybe there's more of a shift in that direction at some point in the future. Who knows?
The truth is, behind closed doors, the P word became my secret sin at age 10.
Number 2, Changes to missionary practices. In the early years of the church, married men with families could be called on missions, sometimes without an end date in mind. Some missions lasted for several years. Thankfully, things have changed, and even more will probably change in the future. Age requirements have and could still change. Maybe a range of mission length options will open up for younger missionaries, similar to senior missionaries. Mission attire has and could still change. Maybe in the future, missionaries won't be knocking doors. Maybe service missions will become a lot more popular. You name it. Number 1, changes to the sacrament ordinance. Current policy is that the deacons or other priesthood holders are responsible for passing the sacrament. Is passing the sacrament something that eternally must be done by priesthood holders? Or is passing the sacrament a responsibility that has simply been assigned to priesthood holders as a matter of policy? In either case, it is a sacred privilege. But if it's more so a matter of assignment rather than inherent duty, then this could change in the future. In fact, in 1928, President Heber J. Grant wrote in a letter to a mission president that at that time, while it was the custom, there was no rule in the church that only priesthood holders could pass the sacrament. He wrote that it would in no wise invalidate the ordinance if some worthy young brethren lacking priesthood performed it in the absence of ordained boys. Now, that's not the church's current policy, but maybe someday in the future, non-priesthood holding men, women, or even older primary kids could be assigned to pass. Along this same vein, what about preparing the sacrament? Surely that's always been the responsibility of the teacher's quorum, right? Perhaps, if you only go back to about 1950 or so. That same brand new article from the church that talks about blessings of healing also states that in the past, women sometimes prepared the sacrament table. It has changed before. It could change again. It can be fun to speculate. I think some of these changes would be great, others probably not so much. But I'm grateful that it's not my job to decide, and I fully sustain those who are calling the shots. If you want to dive deeper into the topic of change in the church,
I love this
past,
video.
present, and
I
future,
actually really enjoyed
go
it.
watch this interview with Ben Spackman.
I
As
enjoyed
of
this
right
video.
now, it is by far the most watched video on our channel. Check it out. Have a great day.
Wow.